The little girl was not supposed to understand what she heard that afternoon. To most people, the sharp, unfamiliar words spoken near the black sedan were just noise carried by the wind between tall glass buildings. But to her, they were a warning wrapped in a language she had quietly learned while the world ignored her presence. She stood there with a small basket in her hands, overlooked, underestimated, and invisible in the way society often made black children feel. The suited guards never imagined that the child they dismissed would be the only one paying attention, and they certainly never imagined that her voice, the one they tried to silence with a single dismissive gesture, would be the very thing that would save a powerful man's life moments later. Before we continue, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Story for more powerful and emotional stories like this. The city moved with a kind of rhythm that only existed in places where wealth and struggle lived side by side without ever truly seeing each other. Towering buildings reflected sunlight like polished mirrors. Luxury cars glided across clean streets, and people in expensive suits walked with purpose, as if time itself worked for them. Yet, among all that movement, there were people who blended into the background so seamlessly that their presence was rarely acknowledged. 9-year-old Amara was one of those people. Every weekday after school, she walked down the same sidewalk with her small woven basket, helping her grandmother deliver handmade pastries to nearby offices. It was a routine built out of necessity rather than choice. Her grandmother's arthritis made it difficult for her to walk long distances, and Amara, despite her young age, had learned that responsibility did not wait for childhood to finish. Most of the office workers barely looked at her. Some passed by as though she were part of the scenery, while others gave polite but distant smiles that never reached their eyes. She was used to being overlooked, used to the quiet assumptions that followed her skin color, her clothes, and the neighborhood she came from. People often assumed she did not understand much, that she was just a quiet little girl, doing small errands in a big world. But what they did not know was that Amara loved languages. Her mother, before she passed away, had worked as a translator and left behind a collection of old language books and audio recordings. Russian, Korean, French, Spanish. Each language was a doorway into a world Amara could explore from her tiny bedroom. While other children watched cartoons, she listened to foreign words, repeating them softly, training her ears to recognize sounds most adults would never notice. That afternoon, the city air felt heavier than usual. A sleek black luxury sedan was parked outside one of the most exclusive corporate buildings on the avenue. Two men in dark suits stood near the car, scanning the area with the alertness of trained security personnel. Their posture alone made it clear that whoever they were protecting was someone important. Amara noticed them immediately, not because of the car, but because of how differently they treated the people around them. When well-dressed executives approached the entrance, the guards nodded respectfully. But when Amara stepped closer to deliver pastries to the reception desk inside the building, one of the guards gave her a quick, dismissive wave, signaling her to stay back as though she were an inconvenience rather than a child simply doing her job. It was a familiar gesture, one she had experienced countless times in places where people like her were not expected to belong. She lowered her gaze and stepped aside, clutching her basket tightly, not out of fear, but out of habit. The habit of shrinking herself in spaces that made her feel unwelcome. Moments later, a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit exited the building. His presence was commanding yet calm, the kind that made people instinctively step out of his way. His expression was focused, almost unreadable, as he walked toward the waiting sedan. Behind him, another security guard checked his watch while whispering something to the first guard. To everyone else, it was just another routine pickup of an important businessman. To Amara, it was something else entirely, because when the guard began speaking under their breath, they switched to Russian, and Amara understood every word. At first, she thought she had misheard. Her small fingers tightened around the handle of her basket as she listened more carefully, pretending to adjust the pastries inside while staying close enough to hear without drawing attention. The words were calm, calculated, and disturbingly precise. They were not discussing schedules. They were discussing timing. They were not talking about safety. They were talking about an incident. And most chilling of all, they mentioned the car. Her heart began to pound, not out of panic, but out of a deep, instinctive realization that something was terribly wrong. The man approaching the vehicle had no idea. The guard spoke as if the plan had already been set, as if whatever was about to happen was inevitable. Amara's mind raced. She looked around, expecting someone else to react, to notice, to question the tension hidden beneath the polished surface of normalcy. But no one did, because no one was listening. And no one was listening because no one expected a little black girl standing quietly with a basket to understand a foreign language spoken by suited security guards in the middle of a financial district. The man reached the car door. One of the guards glanced at Amara briefly, his eyes dismissive, then returned his attention to his colleague. To him, she was insignificant, harmless, invisible. But Amara knew something he didn't. She knew what the word device meant, and she knew what it meant when it was followed by the phrase, under the vehicle. For the first time in her young life, invisibility felt dangerous, because being ignored meant she was the only one aware of a threat no one else could hear. Fear did not arrive in Amara's heart as a loud explosion of panic. Instead, it crept in slowly, heavy and suffocating, like a truth too large for her small body to carry. She stood frozen for a moment, watching the scene unfold as if time itself had slowed down around her. The suited man, who the guards clearly protected, moved closer to the sedan with quiet confidence. His steps were steady, measured, and completely unaware of the danger hidden beneath the surface of routine. Amara's mind wrestled with itself. Adults always told children not to interfere in grown-up matters. She had heard that lesson repeated in schools, in stores, and even in places where she tried to help. Children were expected to observe, not intervene, especially children who looked like her. Children who were often told, directly or indirectly, to stay quiet and not cause trouble. And yet, the word she had just heard refused to fade. The guard's tone had not sounded like speculation. It had sounded like certainty. She remembered the exact phrasing, the reference to timing, the mention of departure, the chilling calmness in their voices, as if they were discussing something already set in motion. Her eyes drifted to the underside of the car, though she could not see anything from her angle. Still, her instincts screamed louder with each passing second. The man reached for the car door. Amara took a step forward instinctively, but one of the guards immediately raised a hand toward her without even looking directly at her face. The gesture was sharp and dismissive, the kind reserved for someone deemed unimportant. To him, she was simply a child stepping out of line. To Amara, that single gesture felt heavier than usual. It was not just dismissal. It was erasure, the assumption that she did not belong in that space, that her presence was an inconvenience, that her voice, if she even used it, would not carry weight. She had seen it before in stores where security followed her more closely than others, in restaurants where servers spoke past her, as if she were invisible, in offices where receptionists asked unnecessary questions before allowing her to deliver pastries. Despite her coming every week, systemic dismissal had taught her silence. But silence, in that moment, felt like complicity. The guard resumed speaking in Russian, their voices low and controlled. They mentioned the time frame again. Minutes, not hours. Precision, not uncertainty. Amara's breathing grew shallow. She realized something else, too. They assumed no one around them understood their language. That assumption gave them confidence. And that confidence came from bias. Because if they had seen her as someone capable of understanding, they would have never spoken so openly. The irony was crushing. Their prejudice had made them careless. She thought of her mother's voice in her memory, encouraging her to never let the world define her intelligence based on her appearance. Her mother had always said that knowledge was a quiet power, one that did not need validation to be real. Now that quiet power sat inside a 9-year-old girl, trembling on a sidewalk while a potential disaster ticked closer with every second. The suited man paused briefly near the car, adjusting his sleeve as one of the guards opened the rear door for him. Amara's pulse surged. If he entered the vehicle, it might already be too late. Her feet moved before her fear could stop them. She stepped forward again, this time more urgently. The guard nearest to her turned his head slightly, irritation flashing across his face. His expression carried the subtle but familiar judgment she had grown used to, an unspoken question about why she was stepping into a space reserved for the powerful. He extended his arm again, firmer this time, blocking her path. To him, it was a simple act of control. To her, it was a barrier between life and death. Amara's thoughts collided in rapid succession. What if she was wrong? What if she misunderstood? What if speaking up caused chaos? What if no one believed her? But then another thought cut through the noise. What if she stayed silent and something terrible happened? Her small hands tightened around the basket until her knuckles turned pale. She remembered every moment she had been ignored, every time her intelligence had been underestimated, every time people assumed she was incapable simply because of who she was. And in that moment, those experiences stopped being wounds and became fuel. She stepped to the side, avoiding the guard's direct block, and raised her voice, not loudly, but firmly enough to reach the man about to enter the car. The movement startled the guards. They had not expected persistence. They had expected compliance. One of them turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as if assessing whether this interruption was worth addressing or dismissing. For a split second, hesitation flickered across his face, not because he believed or mattered, but because unpredictability always disrupted controlled environments. The suited man, now only inches from the car door, paused, not because he recognized the gravity of the situation, but because a sudden shift in energy caught his attention. Amara's heart pounded so loudly she could hear in her ears. She did not shout. She did not panic. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She spoke with urgency grounded in certainty. She explained in careful and precise words that she had heard the guard speaking in Russian about something on the vehicle and a timed incident connected to his departure. For the first time, the guard's composure cracked. Their eyes widened, not in anger, but in shock, because the one person they had ignored was the one person who understood them. And that realization changed everything. The air shifted instantly. The calm professionalism that had surrounded the scene moments earlier dissolved into tension thick enough to feel. The suited man did not move toward the car. Instead, he stepped back slowly, his expression transforming from routine focus to sharp awareness. Security training was built on instinct, and instinct told him that unexpected information, especially precise information, could not be ignored. The guards exchanged quick glances, their earlier confidence replaced by something far more dangerous: exposure. Amara stood still, her chest rising and falling rapidly as adrenaline surged through her small body. She had done the one thing she was always subtly discouraged from doing: speaking up in a space where she was not seen as significant. Now the outcome was out of her hands. The lead guard's posture stiffened. He switched languages abruptly, issuing short, controlled instructions into his earpiece. The shift in tone was immediate and urgent, a stark contrast to the casual whispering from moments before. Within seconds, the perimeter tightened. Another security team member approached the vehicle cautiously, scanning its underside. The suited man was escorted several steps away, his attention now fully locked onto the unfolding inspection. For a long, unbearable moment, nothing happened. The city noise continued as usual. Cars passed. Pedestrians walked. Life moved forward as if the sidewalk was not standing on the edge of a hidden catastrophe. Then the security officer crouched lower. His hand paused mid-motion. His body froze. Even from a distance, Amara could see the tension ripple through him. He slowly leaned back and signaled sharply to the rest of the team. That single gesture confirmed what her instincts had feared. Something was indeed under the car. The atmosphere transformed instantly from controlled vigilance to emergency protocol. The guards who had dismissed her minutes earlier now moved with surgical urgency, creating distance, securing the area, and communicating rapidly through encrypted channels. The suited man's expression darkened, not with fear, but with realization. A realization that his life had been seconds away from danger he never saw coming, and that the warning had not come from trained security. It had come from a child who'd been waved aside, a child whose intelligence had been underestimated, a child whose presence had been dismissed due to bias before being acknowledged due to truth. Authorities were contacted swiftly. Specialists arrived. The vehicle was carefully examined and secured. The object found beneath the sedan was confirmed to be a concealed device, one that could have caused catastrophic harm if the car had been driven away as planned. The magnitude of the moment settled like a heavy silence over the scene. Amara did not fully grasp the technical details. She only understood one simple truth. Speaking up had prevented something terrible. The guards who had ignored her earlier now looked at her differently, not with dismissal, not with irritation, but with stunned recognition. Their earlier assumptions had been dismantled in the span of minutes. The suited man approached slowly, maintaining a respectful distance rather than towering over her. His gaze was thoughtful, almost searching, as if trying to reconcile the contrast between her small frame and the enormous impact of her actions. Around them, investigators began documenting evidence while security personnel reviewed the timeline. Every detail pointed back to one unexpected variable: the overheard conversation, and the one person who understood it. The irony was undeniable. The conspirators had relied on secrecy through language, believing that their choice of words would shield them from detection. But they had failed to consider one crucial factor. Bias narrows perception. They saw a little black girl and assumed limitation. They saw her basket and assumed simplicity. They saw her presence and assumed insignificance. Those assumptions became their greatest mistake. As emergency teams secured the area, the realization spread among everyone present. The story was not just about a prevented incident. It was about who prevented it. A child, an overlooked child, an underestimated child. And as the weight of that truth settled, something deeper emerged, a quiet but undeniable confrontation with the invisible prejudices that had almost cost a life. In the days that followed, the incident became a subject of quiet investigation and widespread reflection. Official reports focused on security lapses, threat analysis, and procedural adjustments. But beneath all the technical language, one human truth remained impossible to ignore. A 9-year-old girl had been the only person paying attention, not because she was trained, not because she was expected to, but because she was used to being invisible. Amara returned to her routine the next week, walking the same sidewalk with her basket, wearing the same simple clothes, and carrying the same quiet composure she always had. On the surface, nothing about her life appeared to have changed. She still helped her grandmother. She still studied her language books at night. She still navigated a world that often underestimated her. Yet, something subtle had shifted. The building that once treated her as a background presence now greeted her with acknowledgement, not exaggerated praise, not performative kindness, but genuine respect. The reception staff listened more carefully. Security personnel nodded rather than wave her aside. Small gestures, perhaps, but meaningful ones. The suited man whose life she had helped protect ensured that her family received support, though he did so quietly, without spectacle. He understood that true gratitude did not need public performance. It needed sincere action. More importantly, the incident sparked conversations far beyond that single street. Experts discussed how bias affects threat perception, how assumptions about intelligence based on race and age can create dangerous blind spots, how society often ignores voices that do not fit traditional expectations of authority. Amara's story became a powerful reminder that awareness is not defined by appearance, that intelligence is not determined by how someone looks, that courage does not require age, status, or recognition, and perhaps most importantly, that dismissal rooted in prejudice can have consequences far greater than hurt feelings. It can become a matter of life and death. For Amara, the experience did not transform her into a public figure or a symbol seeking attention. She remained what she had always been, a thoughtful child shaped by quiet resilience. She continued studying languages, driven not by ambition for recognition, but by curiosity and the memory of her mother's encouragement. At night, as she listened to old recordings and repeated foreign words softly, she understood something profound. Her knowledge had mattered. Her voice had mattered, even when the world initially chose not to hear it. The guards who once dismissed her carried their own lessons. Professional training would evolve, but personal awareness required deeper change. They had witnessed firsthand how unconscious bias could cloud judgment, How quickly they had assumed that the only potential threat to their operation would come from visible sources, not from their own careless conversation overheard by someone they deemed irrelevant. The city itself continued its rhythm, as cities always do. Luxury cars still lined the streets. Executives still walked with urgency. Children still moved quietly through spaces where they were rarely acknowledged. But somewhere within that flow of daily life, a subtle awareness lingered. The awareness that heroes do not always look like what society expects. They do not always wear uniforms. They do not always hold authority. Sometimes they carry small baskets and stand silently on sidewalks, observing a world that rarely pauses to observe them in return. Amara's story also became a mirror reflecting a broader truth about racial bias. Too often, black voices, especially young black voices, are dismissed before they're even heard, their intelligence questioned, their presence minimized, their warnings ignored until validated by someone society deems more credible. Yet, in this case, the truth forced recognition before validation, and that made all the difference. Years later, the memory of that afternoon would remain vivid in Amara's mind, not as a moment of fear, but as a moment of awakening, a moment when she realized that silence, though often expected of her, was not always the right choice, that speaking up, even when dismissed, could change outcomes. That courage is not loud by nature. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in conviction. The greatest impact of that day was not just a life that was saved, but a perspective that was challenged. People who heard her story began questioning their own assumptions. Who do they ignore in their daily lives? Whose voices do they unconsciously dismiss? What warnings go unheard simply because of who delivers them? And slowly, thoughtfully, those questions began to reshape awareness in ways statistics and policies alone could never achieve. Because stories rooted in human experience reach places that data cannot. Amara never sought recognition, yet her actions became a lasting reminder that awareness and empathy must go hand in hand. That listening should not be selective. That respect should not be conditional. And that sometimes the person society overlooks the most is the one paying the closest attention. Her basket remained small. Her voice remained calm. But her impact was immeasurable. And in a world where prejudice often silences truth, one overlooked child proved that courage, awareness, and intelligence can exist in the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel Black Voice Story for more powerful stories that inspire awareness, courage, and change.